Hey, it's Michael, and welcome to another podcast episode. Before I get into today's episode, we wanted to make an offer to you. If you go to firmsconsulting.com, you will see a pop-up or you will see a place to add in your email address, or you can register on the Firms Consulting website. If you register onto that website, you get put into an exclusive list. And what you get in that exclusive list is samples of the content we have available to FC insiders. For example, you could get a sample episode of Competitive Strategy with Kevin Coyne. Kevin Coyne is an ex-McKinsey partner, former worldwide head of strategy, and he had served something like over 25 CEOs on a personal level on a one-to-one basis over his career. Kevin also has a program called How to Become a McKinsey Partner. It's the first time ever a McKinsey partner has gone on record talking about what is actually required to become a partner, and you'll find it's very different from what you think is required. How to Develop Deep Insights, which I have put together, one of our most popular programs, the Electric Car Startup. You will get sample episodes of all of those programs and more if you sign up to this list. So, that said, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hello, Tom.
Hello, Michael.
Do you like Paris, Tom? Have you been to Paris?
I think I went to Paris when I was about 5 years old.
Whoa, you definitely get around when you're a kid, right?
But I haven't been back, and it's on my to-do list. I want to go back.
Did you enjoy? Well, can you remember it when you were? Do you remember much?
I remember walking around in a park. I remember visiting the Eiffel Tower. I know me and my sister had our portraits painted on some famous artist row. I have little snapshots. That's it.
There's one thing I'm pretty certain you didn't do when you were in Paris, and that's probably drink wine and eat mussels, right? Because you were 5 years old.
Yep, I did not do
Okay,
that.
that's good. I've been worrying if you were drinking wine at the age of 5, right? Although it's okay. I mean, if that's what you want to have, it's fine. I mean, I always tell people I actually had whiskey when I was 2 weeks old.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know that?
Was that like a classic treatment, like your mother?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's almost medicinal.
2 weeks old, I had whiskey or some strong spirit, right? It's kind of funny. 2 weeks old.
Helps you sleep.
Helps you sleep. Probably. What if it makes you into alcoholic? I think it's unlikely. Anyway, it worked, right? I've turned out normal, I hope. You can be the judge of that, right? Okay, so let's talk about Sizan. TCO IV.
Yeah.
What do you have any thoughts about Sizan? Anything that you find appealing, interesting?
I'm really curious about the stuff that she went through, the tribulations.
Okay.
During her interview process, and what that, like, how she reacted to that, basically.
Okay, so Sizan's. I'll give you sort of a rundown on Sizan, right? Sizan's a very nice person. I like her.
Mm-hmm.
She's got this really nice French accent, but she's a very nice person. You're going to see that once we release more material, right?
Mm-hmm. She's
a very likable person because she's a very nice person. I notice she says nothing negative about anyone, not even a joke. Do you know that?
I like that a lot in a person.
I like that too. I'm not like that, but I do like that. but it's you like to spend time with those people.
Yeah.
She's never said anything negative about anyone ever in over 50 hours of recordings.
That's impressive.
That is impressive. Mm-hmm. She's also never makes promises she cannot keep.
That's even more impressive.
Not even as a joke.
Mm-hmm.
And I've tested her, right? I remember once when she got a job at a major airline, I was telling her, well, right now you can give me free tickets to Paris. Most people say, yeah, just let me know when.
Right.
She won't even joke about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's very rare when people are like that.
Mm-hmm.
They are very careful to not misrepresent themselves. Now, so what makes Sizan unique? I mean, she's a very unusual lady, right? Mm-hmm. For one thing, she's the first Muslim in our show.
Mm-hmm.
We've never had a Muslim participant. Ever.
Now, is that just an interesting fact, or did that have a material impact on her training development, I guess?
That's a good question. I think it is a material fact. It had a impact.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things we're trying to do is to get participants who are more reflective of the diversity of our clients.
Right.
We've had a lot of Chinese in the program throughout the years. We've had very few white males. A white male is the new endangered species.
Either that, or like we were talking about before, they're the overconfident ones that are, well, that would make them endangered in the long run. So perhaps
They're
so.
like the dinosaurs of the modern era.
Right.
Could be. Well, I don't think it has anything to do with that. I mean, we never look at race and ethnicity when we're making the selection process. For example, so Sizan wasn't selected because she was Muslim. It's just an interesting after the fact. We were very, we wanted her to get into the finals and be selected, but if she didn't make the cut, she wouldn't have made the cut, right?
Right.
So she what struck me as interesting about her is that when she joined the program, she had just finished going through recruiting and it didn't go well. She had been declined, right? But now the tribulations are quite interesting. I'm not going to name the firm to protect her identity a little bit, yeah, right?
Right.
But you're familiar with the terrorist attack last year in Paris, right?
Yes.
Her interview was the day after the terrorist attack.
Yeah, I can't imagine that.
And she's a Muslim lady traveling through Paris the day of the interview. Now, a couple of things happened here. Her particular part of Paris was in a military lockdown. No one was allowed in or out.
Right.
You got a Muslim lady trying to get through the security corridor in Paris.
Yeah.
That could have gone south very quickly. I was actually very upset with her when I realized what she'd done, because she contacted me before and I told her don't go for the interview. It's not safe. So she agreed and she told the company I can't go for one of the major firms, right? One of the lead firms. But then she had some pressure from her family that she shouldn't have canceled the interview. Then she called the firm back the same day and said, I can come for my interview. And then she went for the interview, which is not going to be a pleasant experience. I mean, it's going to be, you can't get in. You've got to show ID, and it's a very dangerous position to be in.
Yeah.
Because obviously she's not doing anything wrong, but you don't know how people react on that situation. It could have gone, she had a very bad experience over those few days. She had no job. She had just returned from Australia, had no job. And we had to stabilize her by finding a job for her. So that's what makes her unusual. She's an experienced hire. She just came back from Australia. She was very successful there, working for Airbus in their defense department as a business development executive. Came back to Paris, couldn't get a job. She had 5 interviews lined up. None of them were converting, and then we had to work with her to get her a job, right? Now, this is very interesting. We managed to get her 2 positions. One was at a consulting firm, and another one was at a major aviation company, airline. Good job in pricing and strategy, great perks, very quantitative role, but it's a very good job, which she liked. But she wanted to take the boutique consulting firm, and you know why she wanted to take the boutique consulting firm?
Did she think that was more of a compatible stepping stone?
No. She thought that the airline job was better, paid better. She wanted to do it, and she thought that it would develop her more. But the reason was quite interesting. She wanted to take the boutique firm because she liked the aviation company so much that if she had to leave them in a year's time or 6 months' time, if she got into McKinsey, because she liked them so much, she didn't want to do that to them.
Oh, okay.
It's a kind of a very bizarre way of thinking about it. I remember having this discussion where I was saying that that's the equivalent of dating 2 guys and marrying the one you like least just in case you get divorced in the future.
Yeah.
Why would you do that to yourself? Right? So, the other reason is that she was very concerned that she wouldn't be able to do the work. It was very quantitative.
Okay.
So I had to prepare for the role. You'll hear us in her sessions. It's very different because you will hear us training her for what we call that role, that filler role, before she goes into and applies for McKinsey. So you can see our situation is very unique. The issues she goes through, minority female in Europe at this time, which is given all of the issues in Europe, it's a difficult position to be in, right? Second, she's needs to find a fuller role and stabilize herself, right? And then third issue is that the office where she wanted to interview, we didn't feel they treat minorities well. And we then encouraged them to withdraw from the interview.
So that's a very interesting point, I think.
Yeah, I mean, America and Europe, they get a bad rap for the way minorities are treated, right? I mean, you see it all the time. Oh, minorities are treated badly. And I'm not saying that minorities are not treated badly. I don't know. I don't know 350 million Americans, right, personally.
Right.
I can't validate all of their claims. But what I can say is that if you've ever been to the emerging markets, minorities are treated even worse.
Mm-hmm.
So she was applying to an emerging market office, and I felt that given her background, because she's a certain ethnic type even in her home country, Turkey, and they're not treated very well. And we know because we've had consultants working in those offices who feed us back information. We then decided that it's not going to be good for her to interview in that office. Which, can you imagine you telling someone, look, you got an interview, we want you to now withdraw from that interview.
Yeah.
That's
gotta
hard,
be scary.
Right?
Yeah.
That is scary. Eventually, I mean, she also raised the issues, but she wasn't sure what to do. We asked her to withdraw from the interview. And then we are going to get her to network into Tokyo and Zurich to redo her interviews. So this is what makes Sizan's journey so interesting.
Well, it's unique. It's a one-of-a-kind story.
It's a one-of-a-kind story. I mean, she's a very successful lady. Make no doubt about that. Airbus sent her to Australia all by herself, and she also worked, I think, a little bit in Southeast Asia as well. And all by herself, and had no presence in some countries like probably Vietnam and Bangladesh and so on. She went there, she set up the office for them, and found their first clients for multi-million-dollar defense contracts.
Yeah, that's huge.
So when people look at this lady and say, oh, she's indecisive, I don't think that is at all true. If you're indecisive, you wouldn't be able to do what she did in Bangladesh and Australia. You wouldn't be able to arrive in these foreign countries where you know nothing about them, you have a foreign accent, and just go up and speak to the head of the defense, to speak to the general running Thailand's military. How do you do that?
Yeah, that takes a lot of gumption.
That takes a lot of gumption, right? I mean, you're a 25-year-old young woman wearing high heels and a dress, and you walking through the streets of Bangkok when it's 45 degrees without humidity. That's not fun, right?
No.
But she was very successful. So I don't think it's an inability to get things done. I think it's more sometimes she questions herself too much. But she doesn't lack confidence. Being a female minority, I think, is difficult. It's hard for you and I to understand that.
Yeah, exactly.
But it must be difficult. It must be very difficult when you're being questioned about everything. People, immediately, they don't give you the benefit of the doubt, I think. And then you're moving countries, you're trying to stabilize things. I think it's very difficult.
Yeah, that's tough.
So that's Sizan. I mean, it's a very interesting, situation with her. And obviously, I don't know how it's going to turn out. TCO IV is live, right? It's happening right now.
We will see.
We will see what happens. But I think she's got a very interesting story. I think she's a very good role model for young women. She's a good role model for young women who may be minorities in the world. And they're wondering, how in the world do I do this? How in the world do I make this happen? If I'm a minority, we don't have rights. We treated badly. How do I turn my life around? She's a very good role model, both from a personality perspective, values, and also she makes things happen. I think that people watching her and trying to mimic her would be good. I think she's a bit anxious at times and she questions herself maybe too much. That's one of the things we would work on. But other than that, she's a very good example of how you should manage your career. So, any questions on Sizan?
No, thank you.
Any concerns about Sizan?
Any concerns about Sizan? I think she's going to have a little bit more of an uphill struggle, it sounds like, than anyone might expect, just because of all of those factors added together. So I don't know. I'm just curious to see how it plays out.
I think the most important thing to remember about Sizan is that when you see someone, you don't know what's happening behind their eyes. You don't know what they've went through. You don't know what they've had to put up with just to be there. And those are one of the things we forget. We judge people on obviously superficial things like what they're wearing, what they say, whether they smiled at me, whether they were friendly to me, right? I mean, if you had to stare down the French military to get to an interview, come
Right.
on. It's very likely that you're going to have a bad experience in your interview, right?
Yeah.
And I felt the way the consulting firm treated her was very bad. They treated her badly. They were not nice to her. They didn't even call her. They didn't even acknowledge that she went through all of those things just to get to an interview.
Yeah.
That is wrong. And I told her, you did nothing wrong. The firm was completely wrong in that. They should not have treated you that way, and they should not have acted that way. They didn't even give you feedback. Right? Someone goes to all that trouble and they don't get feedback. But I don't want to name them. I don't think it's appropriate to shame people. We'll leave that to the IRS, right?
Right.
So I feel that that incident left her a bad taste in her mouth because she was wondering whether she did anything wrong. And that's just the thing, when you're a minority, you think everything, you've done it wrong.
Yeah.
Because you've been groomed that way. And I mean minorities, I don't just mean by race. I mean you could be a minority for any reason. Right? You could be a minority because you like eating donuts. Actually, that's not a minority. That's a majority of people. But you get my point, right?
Yes.
You can be a minority because when I say minorities, people immediately think of ethnicity and race. It's not just ethnicity and race.
But it's anything that can set you apart in your own mind.
Exactly. It's anything that can set you apart or where you feel people are going to treat you differently. That makes you a minority.
Yep.
And I think that the struggles for minorities are... It's... one thing I really hate about media today is we make it sound like the world as... I hear these phrases, women have never before had such an impact in the workforce in the history of mankind. But we're comparing a pretty pathetic base to start with, right?
And how can that be true? It's just...
But it's a very terrible base to begin with. Someone says we're making progress. We have 2 female directors out of 20. We've never had any before. That's progress.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's off a base of 0. Everything's progress, right?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying females should be 50%. I'm not saying females should be 40%. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that choose people on merit. It could be anyone, right? Just work on merit.
Right.
But saying you're making progress, and this thing about minorities is a very annoying thing as well. But people say, well, we have more minorities now than we've ever had. But it's what they choose to report as a minority, right? If you, 100 years ago, reporting Irish people as minorities was normal, right? Did you know that? The Irish were a minority.
Yeah, which is a bit
they took on the worst positions in New York and Chicago because no one wanted to hire them.
Yeah.
And over time, they've integrated, right? So it's what you choose to report as a minority. If a certain minority group is not vocal in pushing for recognition, they don't get recognized. They don't get considered to be a minority. So the issues of minorities, I think, are severe, and I think they deserve attention. But the way to address it is to, I think, arm minority candidates to be successful.
Yeah.
Because there's no other way to do it. Companies are not going to change. They all say they'll change only when they see a market that's big enough.
Yes.
When the LGBT market was small and not making money, no one cared about it. I can tell you that right now. But when the consumer power rose in that market, everyone was falling over themselves, right?
Yeah. When you realize how much money is potentially involved.
I remember the early, situations in San Francisco when, minorities, LGBT communities were fighting for recognition. No one cared about them because they had no purchasing power. But as soon as purchasing power rose, everyone wants to support LGBTs.
Yes.
They just found it in their heart to publish
somehow.
Media. Somehow, we're going to support LGBT. But, another minority, no, they have no purchasing power. They're not organized. We don't care, right?
Yeah.
And that's the way the world works. It's not a great way the world works. But as soon as dogs earn an income, well, we're going to free them because they had a minority with purchasing power, right? That's the way the world works. So I think that, one of the interesting things about Sizan is just seeing how, a female minority pulled it all together. And she's a good role model. I mean, she stabilized her career, got a great position, doing well. That's a good role model for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think if people watch her and they learn from her, they can't really go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's stop there on Sizan, right?
Okay.
And that's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed doing the episode. Finally, I want you to remember that the only way to get access to our special offers, the only way to get our special pricing, and the only way to get samples of our content is to join the list on firmsconsulting.com. It's the only way also to get access to our unique advanced content that we make available to insiders. So if you want to get a sneak peek of things, test it out, see what's in there, this is the place to go. And finally, I want to thank you again for making us one of the largest podcast channels around the world for careers and for the 2 million downloads and counting.